So, how's your day been so far?
It's going all right. I'm enjoying the heat.
Yeah. Are you originally from California or are you from somewhere
I'm
else?
originally from the Bay Area. Yeah,
Oh, nice.
yeah.
I don't go up there too often. I just went for Easter because my significant other, her family's from up there.
hmm
And I gotta say, I don't like it that much. No hate, but I feel like Southern California has a charm to it, you know?
Mm, well, I mean, I got my biases. I'm from there. I feel like a lot of Southern California feels empty. A lot of times it's soulless. but uh, but I have been living here longer than I've lived there. So
Speaking as somebody that grew up in the area,
mhm.
I think it's definitely soulless.
Yeah,
And if you're not soulless when you're here, you'll be at some point
yeah,
by the time you get out.
yeah,
All right. So if you're ready, we can get
yeah.
started.
You have the questions memorized, or how does that work?
I got them.
Oh, okay. I see. I got it. Okay.
So yeah, while we're talking, at some point you like may see me look down while
Okay.
you're talking. I'm not like ignoring you. I promise.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Just
Okay.
taking a look at these. All right. So Alexander David Hueso, who we have here, is assistant professor in what is it? The Global Studies.
Department of Global and International Studies.
Department of Global and International Studies, who also happens to be a faculty member affiliated with the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, which is why we're here. Originally, you got your bachelor's and your master's both at UCLA.
That's correct.
Started in political science and then in Latin American studies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you went to Florida International University to get your PhD. Awesome. So why don't you kind of just lay the groundwork for us and help us get to know you a little bit better? You know, tell us a little bit about your journey, your professional journey, maybe some milestones or some turning points.
My professional journey, I usually describe it like in football terms, like a series of forward fumbles, where I, studied political science, thought I was going to become a lawyer, kind of learned late in that program that I didn't want to study law and I didn't like political science, and ended up teaching for a number of years in the San Francisco Bay Area before I decided to go back for a master's. And it had been so long since I'd been in school that I didn't know what I wanted to get a PhD. I just know I wanted to teach at a higher level. And so I kind of sampled different disciplines and figured out eventually that I wanted to be a geographer. So I studied an interdisciplinary I can never say that word, interdisciplinary program at Florida International that was a mix of geography, anthropology, and sociology. And then milestones, what do you mean by milestones in terms of becoming a professor, or what?
I guess just like significant moments that sort of led you to where you are. It doesn't necessarily have to be like in terms of like professional stuff, but maybe something that helped you decide that, okay, I think this is what I want to do, or I think this is what I want to study or focus on.
Sure. So I think, well, I think we'll talk about it in the course of the conversation about my research. But one milestone is realizing that my research had to be oriented by justice in some form, whether it's social or environmental or socio-environmental. So at a certain point, I feel like everything after that point became about how does my teaching and research and everything I do at the university level be in service of generating awareness about different justice issues and doing something about those issues.
Right. Just sort of trying to give it a bigger purpose, right?
Yeah, but besides the self-serving, I needed
Right.
a job. Yeah.
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 No, I relate to that for sure. And you already touched on it a little bit, you know, how you taught many different places at many different levels. I understand that you taught in the CSU system and at UC San Diego. But then eventually, you know, here we are 2025 and you're here. We're lucky to have you here in UC Irvine. So what made Irvine sort of the place where you wanted to be?
It was the fit in terms of the department and just me gravitating towards the people in the department and feeling like there was a place for me here and that I could contribute to, that I could give something back in terms of my regional focus and in terms of the topics that I teach about and conduct research on.
I see. So now we're going to talk a little bit about your research, right? I did a little bit of a dive into your research, and I read some of your book that just got published a couple months ago. Congrats on that, by the way. That's incredible.
Thank you.
And something that I was sort of drawn to, or actually, why don't you sort of give us the general panorama of what your research encompasses?
So if we're talking about the book, it specifically addresses, the war on drugs through an environmental justice studies framework. And my research generally deals with aspects of environmental justice, migration studies, and the war on drugs. I don't know if you want me to elaborate on any of that.
That's perfect. And I think when I was looking into that research, I think one of the things that I was drawn to the most, and I'm sure a lot of people relate to this too, is the contradiction that you talk about between the official discourse of getting rid of these fields of coca and some opium poppy fields. And I think like what drew you to that, to look into that contradiction between the official discourse and what the experiences on the ground were, especially in terms of aerial eradication. And then why don't you just give us a little...
What it is?
Yeah, pretty much.
Aerial eradication is often, it's called that in the kind of war on drugs discourses. It's referred to as aerial eradication. And it's to distinguish it between, it is a form of aerial fumigation. So it's basically using crop dusters to fly over regions where there are illicit crops and then spray them. And there's been a variety of different chemicals used over time. Most recently, the chemical used was the herbicide known as glyphosate, which is an everyday product that people, know as Roundup in the United States. It's manufactured by Monsanto. And so the idea being that that this is a way to lower the alkaloid content of the coca to make it less profitable and to people think it kills the plants. It doesn't necessarily kill the plants. It just makes them less profitable and ruins a lot of crops. And it ruins a lot more than just coca or opium poppies. It ruins subsistence crops, right?
Right, sort of a blanket solution.
A blanket solution, right? And so what drew me to this topic is the fact that that this is not something that people would do in the U.S., right? This is being done because it's another country, and it's like the demand is coming from the U.S. and a lot of places in the global north, and it's coming from, it's an increasingly, if we're talking about cocaine, it's a drug used in the global south as well. But the main impetus for conducting this kind of war on drug strategy is that we want to stop the flood of cocaine into the United States, Colombia being the primary supplier. So let's conduct this strategy, which is a lot safer than pulling the plants out of the ground, right? And it's difficult to reach some of these areas where you could say, oh, we could have an alternative development project, some other kind of crop, but those usually aren't successful either, because the problem is that people are disconnected from global markets, right? They live in very isolated parts, disconnected from basically from roadways and transportation networks that would be able to get their goods to the market, right? So going back to your original question, which is, why focus on that, right? Is because I already had an understanding of what was happening in Colombia. I'm a U.S. citizen, right? And I get handed this this flyer basically stating that it's an open letter. It's not a flyer. It's an open letter to the global community saying that this is a form of biochemical warfare that the Colombian government is conducting on its own people, and that the U.S. is pushing them to do this, and the U.S. is, and has a great part in why this is happening. And then I had that experience of having that kind of be sent to me, and at the same time, I'm a PhD student at Florida International, where you have these drug policy officials and people come and speak and basically explain it away as if it's the thing to do, right? And that it's not harmful and blah 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 blah. And so that was the intention of my dissertation, was to explore that disconnect, right? And it's something that I explore in the book that you mentioned.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see it from the other perspective, because I think when people think of the war on drugs, it's usually from the perspective of the U.S. and how that affected communities stateside, but not necessarily how that looked abroad. And along those lines, I think something that I found really interesting in your work that I liked a lot was the emphasis that you give to these sort of testimonial accounts from the people that are, on the ground, these farmers. On your website, I saw an interview that you did with a farmer who was talking about having to go and canoe for an hour and then through the jungle for 20 minutes to even get to his field, which is being affected. So I just wanted to get to know a little bit more about how these narratives sort of help you in your book and in your research, and how that has shaped the way that you look at the situation that you write about.
So I always start off by telling people my book is weird, because the chapters are literally names of supernatural entities.
Right.
And so I did this first research project, master's research at UCLA, on whether there was a rise in the belief in supernatural entities in Colombian cities, because a lot of people were being displaced from the countryside to cities. And then later I did this research on something that I mentioned had more to do with my positionality as a U.S. citizen and someone whose taxes contribute to the war on drugs.
Right.
And so the book idea was basically to combine those two, and because though it's not normally associated as a direct form of displacing people from the countryside to cities, it is something that contributes, this war on drugs strategy, and also in combination with the demand for drugs and the way that transforms landscapes, is something that contributes to the displacement of people from the countryside to cities. And so I specifically focused on Afro-descendent communities, known as comunidades negras, that have their own territorial claims based on ethnic identity, a cultural identity, based on traditions, right? And so the book explores that, and in doing so, I mentioned that I'm exploring both the kind of global dimensions of environmental racism and justice, and the more than human dimensions of environmental racism and justice. So I eventually talk about things like rights to nature, or natural rights, which is this kind of new movement in environmentalism of natural entities such as rivers, lakes, mountains being considered beings unto themselves that should have rights.
Right. Yeah, no, and I just want to start off by saying, I think, sure, we can call it weird, but weird in a good way.
I hope so.
Yeah. Another thing that I really liked about it is the art that you have in it. It's very unique. It's really awesome. The cover, of course, kind of being center stage, but also throughout the book. And I liked how I think it was in the beginning, in the acknowledgments or something like that, you talked about how the cover itself was commissioned as a piece specifically for the book, and the importance behind the art throughout the book, and how you wanted people to see the art first and then get their interpretations and then sort of your analysis of it. That was really nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I was inspired by a lot of different things. One of them was the TV show Ozark, which starts off each episode with the letter O and then 4 images inside of the O. And as I was watching the TV show, I'd always pause it and try to figure out, okay, what are those images? Okay, how does that make sense within the trajectory of the story?
Right.
And what is this episode going to be about? I would try to figure it out ahead of time. And so that was part of the intention behind these images. It was also kind of a way to so what I did is I hired an illustrator, a Colombian illustrator. We've been working together now for several years, right? And would describe what I wanted, would come back with a draft, with a sketch, and then we'd fine tune it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, there's aspects of the supernatural that are hard for people to wrap their minds around, and then there's also incidences of violence that are very graphic, and you don't want to show a picture of that kind of thing,
Right.
but you also want to ground people in the story that's being told.
Right. Get that visceral reaction to
Exactly. So that's why I felt like the illustrations are important in that regard. Yeah.
Right. And I wanted to take the conversation back a little bit to the contradictions between the official discourse and sort of what's happening on the ground. And I guess what's your analysis of why these things have continued throughout so long to the point where, it would merit such a great book like the one that you wrote, sort of breaking this down?
So I view this as a pattern that we see in lots of different instances where we can see, this is why I feel like this is one of the strengths of a critical approach to anything, but a critical approach in the social sciences is not to take certain categories for granted, because when I say that, I mean words like environment, words like biodiversity, right? What do we actually mean when we're talking about these terms, right?
Right.
So going back to the story that's being told, there's a way in which, there are various examples of these drug policy officials, both the U.S. and Colombian, explaining what they're doing, this aerial eradication or aerial fumigation, if you want to call it, as environmental conservation, right?
Right.
And so picking that apart, unpacking that is part of what I try to do in that book, right? And there's lots of other examples where, we need to do this because it's important to national security, Colombian national security, U.S. national security. Well, what do you mean when you say national security, and who are you actually trying to protect? Because you're actually harming a lot of lives in the process, right?
Right, but it's just one of those things that happens to be, out of sight, out of mind. As long as it's abroad, we can sort of do whatever we need to do, and people stateside that actually affect, the positions of these people in power.
And that relates back to the whole kind of argument about this being an example of environmental racism and how environmental justice or instances of environmental injustice happen throughout the world. As long as you're not seeing it, as long as the sweatshop that's producing this fast fashion is not in your backyard, polluting your lakes, you're not concerned with it. Right. You're just buying it, right? And so that's how I kind of related back to that aspect of it.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
And I think something that I wanted to touch on too is, we have the official discourse, and then we have the other side of it, the testimonial narrative, or the people on the ground. And you talk a little bit about, their resistance to this official narrative, and part of it being some of like these comunidades negras, like cosmologies and like sort of thinking about the world. And I was hoping maybe you could expand on that a little bit, on what that resistance looks like in this area.
So the common thing, I think, in a lot of different communities in Colombia and throughout Latin America is to lean into the notion of territory. Like, there's a state conversation about territory, and then there's these individual communities have their conversations about this is our territory, and territory means a lot of different things in many different contexts. But some of that conversation is, this is not how we do things. Like, this is not part of our culture, right? To cultivate coca is not part of our culture, and we're being punished for something that has been imposed on us from lots of different angles, right? And impose might be too strong of a word in certain cases. Some people are just feel pressured into it. Some people willingly do it because they feel like they have no other economic alternatives, right? So it's a matter of survival. And some people are over the top and obviously are clearly profiting from something, and yeah, you would expect there to be punishment in that case. But the original question was, sorry,
about the forms of resistance.
the forms of resistance, right? So how I connect this back to environmental justice is because these communities don't consider themselves to be environmental justice struggles. That's a label I'm putting on the situation. But the way that they resist these struggles is, in the first place, the concept of justice is collective. It's collectively determined. It's a constant process of determining what people think is fair, right? So it's leaning into the unity in the word community and that part of it. And then also, if you want to get something, unfortunately, the way that the world works is that no one's going to believe you if you're from this part of the world and don't have a lot of education, formal education, right? And also you're marginalized because of your ethnic background and your traditions, right?
Right.
So there is a need for local communities to be in contact with researchers like myself, who can validate some of their claims and pick apart some of the arguments that we've been discussing, right?
Right.
And so I don't do the specific work of, this is the science that says that this is an environmental injustice. My work is more focused on, the Colombian police and the United States Embassy and other entities are saying that this is the way that we solve the problem. And these folks are saying, these communities are saying, we haven't been consulted about this at all.
Right.
There's no conversation happening here. And that continues to be the case in that country, where there's been a big disconnect. Speaking of disconnects, there's a disconnect between the different government entities and different populations that continue to not have a relationship. So I look at it more as being this issue being a function of that, versus, these folks don't know right from wrong, right? And so resistance looks a lot of different ways, but part of it is, achieving solidarity amongst the community themselves, right? How are we going to confront this war on drugs issue? How are we going to get people in our communities to stop cultivating coca? And how are we going to leverage international voices and actors that our government will pay attention to in that conversation?
Right. And to comment on a couple of points, I think it's a good point to bring up that some people just don't feel like they have another option. And I think of that Vice documentary that came out a long time ago of them interviewing these farmers that say, well, if we don't do this, then they're just going to take over the farm, and then we're out of a job and they might kill us. So this is sort of the only option that we have in front of us.
Yeah.
And the other thing is this sort of happening that's being propagated by not just, Colombia and the Colombian government, but also by the U.S. And this environmental racism sort of being it's being focused, or it's getting taken from this notion of necropolitics is something that you mentioned too, that I thought was really interesting, because I don't think I've thought about it within this context. So maybe I wanted to see if you could talk about that a little bit.
Sure. What I mean by necropolitics?
Yeah, in this context specifically.
Yeah. So in the simplest terms, I mentioned biopolitics mostly to later expand upon what I think necropolitics is and how it's playing out in this particular scenario. But in the simplest terms, I think of biopolitics as something that most people can relate to nowadays, because not too long ago we went through a pandemic where biopolitics was how a lot of folks viewed how people were going to get through it. Right? We need to discipline ourselves in certain ways and spatially divide ourselves so that we can maximize the ability to live. Right? That's biopolitics has a lot to do with that. Right? How to maximize what's being done so that the population will survive.
Right.
Necropolitics, comes from this Cameroonian scholar, philosopher, Achille, who's making a critique of biopolitics and says, well, that works in the particular, Michel Foucault is credited with developing this idea of biopolitics. He's like, that idea works in the context of European history, right? But it doesn't really apply to what happened throughout the rest of the world, which is colonialism, slavery, and there was a choice of who was going to live and who was going to die.
Right.
And the argument is that's when we start talking about that, now we're talking about necropolitics, that some people need to be sacrificed in order for others to live. And so I try to frame environmental justice through that lens as well. When we talk about places like sacrifice zones where people are living near factories or have to live near freeways and have to constantly be, be subjected to pollution and things that are going to kill them, maybe not immediately, but over the course of their lifetime, right? That is also a form of necropolitics, right? Where, and so I don't want to bore you with the details of, all the different kinds of necropolitics that I talk in the book, but that's kind of where that conversation is headed. Yeah.
Well, then I think maybe we can talk about one of them. Which one of these environmental policies or harms do you think is sort of the first one on the list, the first one that needs to be dismantled or addressed in order to sort of aid, the population of Colombia?
Which form of necropolitics needs to be addressed first? Is that the question?
Yeah, or more so like which environmental or drug-related policy is you sort of view as the most harmful that propagates this necropolitics?
I don't know if I'd be able to specify, because that's a very subjective question and different folks would have different answers about that. I'll speak more broadly to the fact that some of the decisions that we make as people conducting research, as people thinking about these problems, sometimes unwittingly or unconsciously contribute to some of the problems. So I'll give you an example, and that's that in the case of aerial eradication, it was not permitted in two areas. It was not permitted in indigenous reservations, and it was not permitted in national parks, right? And the idea being that for indigenous peoples, you got to consult them first because some of them do have this tradition of cultivating coca in their communities.
Right.
So in the very least, they should be consulted. Whether that actually happened or not, that didn't seem to be the case, but whatever.
Right.
And the other case that I mentioned was national parks, like this idea that there's that a lot of cultivation is leaking into national parks, and it's happening there because they're protected areas, but you're not allowed to spray there because of the biodiversity.
Right.
Now, if you look at the geography of the country, the areas where these Afro-descendent communities, rural collectively titled Afro-descendent communities, comunidades negras, they're the same areas as these indigenous reservations and these national parks.
Right.
But you're allowed to spray there as if biodiversity is somehow different in a national park versus an area that's populated.
Right.
And it speaks to the fact that the way that we've defined concepts like biodiversity is very ecocentric. It's very focused on what we see as green or not inhabited by humans.
Right.
And it's not, and it doesn't include people.
Right.
And so that's an issue that's not just happening in Colombia, but all over the world, where there's this push to save the planet and conserve, and demarcate spaces as places where we need to conserve these areas to preserve wildlife, to preserve plant species, to preserve biodiversity, because these are where we're going to find the solutions to cancer. And it's not acknowledging that some people actually don't have a problem coexisting in their environment and not harming it. Right. So it's a real kind of backwards way of thinking, and it leads to the kind of necropolitical decisions that are being made, such as, we can spray in these areas because these people are criminals, and it's okay just to compromise their livelihoods, right? And their lives,
Yeah. Well, I really want to thank you for coming in today. I feel like we could keep talking about this for a lot longer. It's a really interesting topic. But yeah, again, thank you for joining us. And thank you everybody for listening in to Alex Huezo's interview. Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
I got it too.
Marco, you have to turn that off because that happened the last time.
Huh?
That was amazing, you guys.
Oh, thank you.
I was having the time of my life watching this podcast be recorded live.
Yeah.
This is so fascinating.
I hope, yeah. I just hope I make sense.